When Maye Musk walked alone into Judge Catherine Lowell's courtroom that bright Monday morning, there was a hush that quickly turned to a ripple of mocking laughter. In a place where corporate giants often paraded teams of high-priced lawyers, here stood a woman past 70, wearing a simple blue dress and clutching a cloth tote instead of a designer briefcase. 1,000 eyes were on her as she approached the defendant's table. Cameras whirred from every corner of the gallery, broadcasting her every move to a hungry world. The scrolling headlines had already written her off. Maye Musk, the so-called old lady influencer, defending herself in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Atlas Labs. Judge Lowell had spent nearly 3 decades on the bench, presiding over everything from high-profile fraud to political scandal. She rarely showed emotion behind her dark-rimmed glasses, but when she saw Maye place a crumpled stack of folders on the table, a faint smirk broke through her stern facade. Another amateur, she thought. Another idealist who thinks her social media fame is enough to survive a federal courtroom. Bailiff, call the case. The clerk's voice echoed across the tall oak panels. Case number 2025 CV 1448. Atlas Labs Incorporated vs. Musk Nutrition LLC. Judge Lowell straightened in her chair, tapping her pen on the gavel. Mrs. Musk, my notes show you are representing yourself today. Is that correct? Maye drew a breath. Her hands trembled slightly, the papers shifting and nearly sliding off the table. Yes, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the gallery, mixing shock and pity. One of the journalists in the front row tilted his phone to catch a better shot of her pale face, whispering to his livestream audience, "She's actually going pro se, can you believe it?" Judge Lowell pushed her glasses higher on her nose. Mrs. Musk, this is a federal intellectual property case, not a talk show. She paused for effect, letting the courtroom chuckle. I strongly suggest you consider hiring competent counsel. I understand, Your Honor, Maye answered softly. Very well. The judge gave a thin, almost cruel smile. Atlas Labs, opening statement. Please. The plaintiff's lead attorney rose with the calm confidence of a predator. He was everything Maye was not. Tall, sleek, draped in an expensive suit that looked freshly tailored. Behind him, 3 other attorneys shuffled exhibits with robotic precision, setting up a massive digital screen and gleaming rows of labeled evidence boxes. Your Honor, he began, my client has invested tens of millions of dollars in researching a proprietary anti-aging nutritional formula, the first of its kind. He glanced over at Maye with cool contempt. We believe Mrs. Musk has unlawfully copied this formula, repackaged it under her own brand, and misled thousands of consumers into thinking it is her original creation. By the end of this trial, the facts will leave no doubt. Judge Lowell nodded. Thank you, counsel. Mrs. Musk, do you have an opening statement? Maye rose slowly, smoothing a wrinkle from her dress. She lifted a single sheet of handwritten notes, then dropped it by accident. The sheet fluttered to the polished floor, and a camera instantly zoomed in. Online, the comment section erupted with scorn. Look at her, someone typed. Can't even hold her papers. Maye bent to pick it up, her back stiff, cheeks burning. The courtroom laughter simmering around her like a pot about to boil over. Your Honor, she began again. I am here today because Atlas Labs is claiming ownership of a formula that has been my life's work. She tried to steady her voice, but it broke. I have evidence that this formula is based on decades of patient care and, Judge Lowell raised a palm, cutting her off. Mrs. Musk, please, organize your thoughts. This is a court of law, not a motivational speech. The gallery snickered. Someone in the back row lifted a phone and began streaming Maye's face close-up, zooming on her shaking hands. Maye lowered her eyes to the stack of folders, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. 40 years of building knowledge, of teaching nutrition, of fighting to support 3 children after a painful divorce, and now it all felt as fragile as a single misplaced page. Judge Lowell sighed, glancing toward the plaintiff's table. Atlas Labs, you may proceed with your first witness. As the corporate lawyers moved forward with smooth, practiced confidence, Maye sank back into her chair. For a moment she stared at the courtroom wall, blank and distant, as if retreating far from the swirl of voices and flashing camera lights. They could call her an old lady influencer. They could laugh. But deep in her bones, past the trembling and the shame, Maye Musk still remembered who she was. And she would not give up without a fight. Dominic Shaw, the lead attorney for Atlas Labs, stepped forward with the confidence of a ringmaster in a circus he owned. Behind him, 4 other lawyers arranged themselves like a chorus line, each with a crisp tablet in hand. The projection screen flared to life, bright and cold, and a massive chemical diagram appeared, framed by corporate logos. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," Shaw announced, "what you see here is the unique molecular signature of Atlas Labs' flagship anti-aging nutritional compound. Proprietary. Tested. Proven." He paused dramatically, letting the sleek graphics sink in. Then he clicked a button on a small remote, and a second diagram appeared beside the first, nearly identical but with Maye Musk Nutrition stamped across the top. Shaw turned to face Judge Lowell, voice rich with self-satisfaction. "As Your Honor can clearly see, the similarities are overwhelming. Ingredient for ingredient, dosage for dosage, there is almost 90% overlap. That is not coincidence. That is theft." A murmur rippled through the gallery, some reporters scribbling furiously while others typed out quick one-liners for their live updates. A woman at the back shook her head and whispered to her phone's camera, "This old lady really thought she could beat a billion-dollar company?" Judge Lowell leaned forward, her face tight with disapproval. "Mrs. Musk, are you following this presentation?" Maye sat very still, her pen hovering above a cheap legal pad. "Yes, Your Honor," she answered, eyes fixed on the diagram. The judge tapped her gavel gently. "Then please take notes properly. If you intend to mount a defense, you cannot sit there daydreaming." "Yes, Your Honor." Shaw continued, clicking through slide after slide. Photos of Atlas Labs research facilities. Lab technicians in pristine white coats. Clinical trial data with rows of numbers and glowing charts. Professional, polished, invincible. With each new screen, the weight on Maye's shoulders seemed to grow heavier, though she refused to let her posture crumble. She scribbled a few lines, crossed them out, wrote them again. Her fingers shook. Every so often, she glanced away, toward the tall courtroom window, where the distant blue sky seemed to promise a kinder world. On social media, the running commentary grew crueler. Viewers spammed emojis of clowns and broken scales of justice. One headline raced across a news ticker, "Granny Musk fumbles in court." Shaw paused to sip water, then returned to the attack. "Our experts will testify, Your Honor, that no one could have arrived at such a complex formula independently. It would take years of specialized research and tens of millions in funding." He gestured to Maye as if she were a curiosity on display. "Mrs. Musk, with all respect, does not have the facilities or resources to develop something so advanced on her own." Maye looked up, her face lined with fatigue but also something steadier than fear. She said nothing, just wrote another note and underlined it twice. Judge Lowell sighed audibly. "Mrs. Musk, if you wish to respond, please keep your papers in order. This is not a cooking show." Another small ripple of laughter. Dominic Shaw smiled, feeding on that moment. "Your Honor, let us be honest. Public health is too important to be left to internet personalities with questionable credentials. The stakes are enormous. The public deserves better." Maye's hand twitched around her pen. Her mind tried to pull back, to find air in a courtroom that felt as tight as a sealed box. 40 years of patience. 40 years of certifications, workshops, tears, triumphs, all of it eclipsed by this display of corporate perfection. Shaw turned again, clicking forward to a witness profile. "Allow me to call our first expert. Dr. Thomas Reynolds, Ph.D. in biochemistry, Stanford graduate, former department chair, world-renowned researcher." Reynolds strode to the witness box, hair combed so precisely it looked painted on. He nodded toward the gallery like an actor greeting an audience. "Dr. Reynolds," Shaw said with a smile, "please explain for the court how unique this formulation is." Reynolds launched into a fluent, confident explanation. Scientific words cascaded like a waterfall. Proprietary protein stabilizers. Time-release micronutrient patterns. Advanced antioxidant vectors. Judge Lowell seemed impressed, leaning forward and nodding with the easy familiarity of a judge who had read her share of scientific filings. Maye tried to follow, jotting broken notes that made no sense. Her mind was fraying at the edges. She looked down at her own shaky scrawl, decades of practice, patient recovery rates, clinic data, old case files. A voice in her head whispered, "You are losing." Outside, a helicopter chopped the sky, drawing cameras to the courthouse roof. Somewhere across the internet, a clip of Maye fumbling her papers had already gone viral. The hashtags were ruthless. As Reynolds wrapped up his polished testimony, Shaw gave Maye a theatrical glance. "Mrs. Musk, any questions for this witness?" Maye rose, though every muscle seemed to argue against it. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally she shook her head. "No questions, Your Honor." "Sit down then," Judge Lowell ordered, voice tinged with resignation. "If you have nothing to challenge, I will accept Dr. Reynolds' expertise as unchallenged for the record." May Saturday. Her throat was tight, her heart hammering like a wild bird trapped behind her ribs. She looked out that tall window once more, letting the sunlight hit her eyes. For a single second she let herself slip away from the wooden steel of the courtroom, back to a quiet kitchen in Toronto, where she had comforted crying patients, where she had saved lives with food and knowledge. "They think you are weak," she told herself. "They think you are finished." Maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed them to believe. That night, after the first punishing day in court, Maye returned to a small rented office across from the courthouse. The air felt stale, her mind heavy from the weight of glares and condescension. She dropped her tote bag on a cheap metal chair, removed the wrinkled folders, and laid them carefully on a battered desk. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she answered without even glancing at the caller ID. "Hi Mom," Tosca's familiar voice said. "You sound tired." Maye sighed, letting her shoulders sag. "I am, Tosca. I really am. How did it go today?" Maye hesitated. Then she let out a soft, bitter laugh. "About as badly as you might imagine. They have lawyers stacked to the ceiling. Experts. Videos. Charts. And me with my grocery store folders." Tosca was silent for a second, then gently asked, "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" "I have to," Maye said. Her voice steadied, an echo of old battles. "No one else knows this formula like I do." There was a quiet pause, just breathing between mother and daughter, separated by miles but sharing the same burden. "Mom," Tosca finally said, "tell me again why this formula matters so much to you." Maye looked around the rented office, at the flickering fluorescent light that reminded her of a clinic she once ran in Toronto. She closed her eyes, letting memories flood her. After the divorce, she had stood on a freezing street outside a rented apartment with 3 small children and a single suitcase. There was no savings. No guaranteed work. Just a license to practice nutrition and a heart stubborn enough to try. The nights had been the worst. Alone in a tiny kitchen after the children fell asleep, she would measure protein powders and dried beans, sketching out diet plans by hand on scraps of newsprint. Anything to help her patients eat healthier, fight diabetes, hold off heart disease. "I started with nothing," Maye told Tosca quietly. "I was alone, terrified, and there were days I was so poor I couldn't even fix the stove. But there were mothers like me coming to my clinic who needed help, and they trusted me." She remembered them clearly. A diabetic woman whose swollen feet barely fit in her shoes. A father with cholesterol so high the doctor wanted him on a lifetime of pills. A teenage girl crying from shame about her weight. They had sat with Maye, sharing fears, begging for something that worked. "That is where I built this formula," Maye said. "Not in a shiny lab but at a kitchen table, piece by piece, patient by patient." Tosca's voice broke through gently. "But didn't you refine it later?" "Yes," Maye answered, pushing back tears. "Years later, after I finally stabilized my practice, I partnered with a small biotechnology lab in Montreal. They were trying to document traditional food therapies scientifically. We did trials together, tracking glucose spikes, inflammation responses, recovery times. They helped me standardize every measure so it would meet modern regulations. We submitted all that data to the Canadian Nutritional Sciences Association, and I still have those certificates. Then why does Atlas think they can take it? Because they think I'm easy to push around." She clenched a pen between her fingers until it almost snapped. "They think because I am a woman in my 70s, because I was once a broke single mother, because I do not have a wall full of legal degrees, I will just surrender. She shook her head, feeling heat under her skin, remembering the other courtroom long ago when she had fought for custody of her children. Her ex-husband had called her unstable, incapable, told the judge she was obsessed with work and couldn't raise kids. But she had stood there, eyes burning, refusing to cry, refusing to leave her children behind. I am not giving up, she whispered now, more to herself than Tosca. I know you won't, Tosca replied, soft and strong. For a moment, May could almost taste the stale cafeteria coffee she used to sip at midnight while writing food plans for patients who couldn't pay, could almost feel the weight of sleeping children against her side. They had survived. They had thrived. And she had built this knowledge the hard way, spoon by spoon, meal by meal, long before Atlas Labs had even formed its board of investors. Mom, Tosca said gently, do you want me to fly out? No, May answered. I need you to stay with the kids, help them keep their routine. This is mine to do. Tosca's silence carried a quiet pride. Then I believe in you, Mom. May looked around the dim office again, at the yellowed folders, the carefully labeled charts she had carried across decades and continents. They were stained with tea, covered in handwritten scrawls, but every mark was a testament. She would not let them be erased. When the call ended, May sat a long time in the silence. Her fingers hovered over the folders, tracing the edges, remembering every failure and triumph hidden in those pages. A formula was not just protein and fiber and herbs. It was the story of every patient who had trusted her, of every night she had doubted herself and still gotten up the next day. Outside, a distant siren wailed through the San Francisco night. May listened to it fade, then gathered the documents carefully back into her tote. She pressed one hand against her chest, centering herself. They think you are old, she reminded herself. They think you are weak. Let them keep thinking that. Tomorrow, she knew, Atlas Labs would roll out even more lawyers, more experts, more humiliating barbs. Tomorrow, Judge Lowell might again treat her like a naive grandmother playing at law. Tomorrow, the cameras would still track every tiny tremor in her hands. But tomorrow, Maye Musk would still stand. And deep inside, where no camera could see, she was already gathering every piece of proof she had ever built, every moment of certainty forged from a lifetime of fighting for her family and her patients. She could almost hear the voices of those patients urging her on, the woman with diabetic ulcers, the father with cholesterol, the teenage girl who had learned to smile again. Their faces lived in her memory. They had put their hope in her, and she would not let them be stolen by a corporation's greed. It was never about money, she told herself. It was about protecting the people who believed in her. May stood, steadied her shoulders, and looked in the cracked mirror over the dusty sink. The woman looking back was tired, lined, but her eyes were not finished. They were calm. They were ready. Let them underestimate me, she whispered to the mirror. That is the best gift they could ever give. The second day in court began with the same brittle sunlight spilling through the tall windows of Courtroom 7. Reporters gathered even earlier this time, their cameras waiting, their commentary sharper. Some called May reckless, others pitied her, but no one seemed to expect anything except defeat. The bailiff called the case again, voice echoing off marble columns, and May rose slowly at the defense table, heart hammering against her ribs. Judge Lowell looked even more severe today, tapping her pen sharply. Mrs. Musk, she began, I remind you that federal court is no place for amateur dramatics. This is your second day without qualified legal counsel. I strongly suggest you reconsider. May's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. Thank you, Your Honor, but I will proceed. Very well. The judge sighed as if disappointed by a stubborn child. Atlas Labs, your next witness. Dominic Shaw stood with a confident half-smile and smoothed his already perfect tie. Your Honor, today we will present conclusive evidence that Mrs. Musk's formula was not only copied, but marketed in bad faith. He gestured toward his legal team, who clicked a button that filled the courtroom screen with a polished promotional video. Music swelled, images of smiling seniors flashing on the screen. A narrator with a deep, soothing voice described May's formula as a revolutionary cure, though May had never claimed it was a cure. Shaw paused the video dramatically. Mrs. Musk's marketing has misled the public, he declared. She positions herself as an expert yet is not a licensed physician. May took a breath, steadying her hands on the table. Shaw turned to the judge. Your Honor, we will also enter into evidence published studies from Atlas Labs, proving their clinical trials were documented and peer-reviewed while Mrs. Musk cannot show any comparable data. One of his associates laid a stack of glossy reports on the evidence cart. Peer-reviewed, published, fully certified, Shaw repeated. The camera crews were eating it up. A live-stream commentator whispered, "She looks so lost. Poor grandma, this is hard to watch." Judge Lowell glanced at May with an edge of impatience. "Mrs. Musk, have you had a chance to review these materials?" "Yes, Your Honor," May answered. "And will you be able to challenge them today?" May hesitated, then lifted her chin. "I will try." "Try," the judge repeated flatly. May swallowed hard. Shaw smiled thinly. "Mrs. Musk, do you deny placing language on your website that suggests your formula reverses aging?" "I never used the word cure," May insisted. "I described benefits for healthy aging, supported by lifestyle changes." Shaw waved a dismissive hand. "Tomato, tomato," he said, drawing a faint laugh from the gallery. Judge Lowell held up her palm. "Mr. Shaw, enough." Then she turned to May. "If you cannot properly answer these claims, I will have to treat them as unchallenged, Mrs. Musk." May gripped the table so tightly her knuckles burned. "Your Honor, I request permission to present my own defense after their witnesses conclude." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any actual evidence to support your counterclaims?" May's eyes steadied, voice trembling but clear. "I do, Your Honor." Dominic Shaw chuckled under his breath. "I am fascinated, Mrs. Musk, what groundbreaking legal argument you might bring." She looked straight at him, no trace of a smile. "The truth," she said simply. He tilted his head in mock respect. "By all means, enlighten us when the time comes." The next witness came forward, Dr. Elaine Carver, a respected nutritionist who had consulted with Atlas Labs. She was polished and precise, describing clinical protocols and high-level product testing. Her language was filled with credentials, published citations, and long strings of Latin that made the jury's head swim. Judge Lowell followed every word, occasionally glancing at May with something close to pity. "Mrs. Musk, are you understanding this testimony?" "I am, Your Honor." "Then you may cross-examine if you wish." May stood, heart pounding. She approached the witness box, papers clutched in both hands. "Dr. Carver, you stated you helped Atlas Labs run a large-scale clinical trial 2 years ago. Did you or your team ever review traditional nutritional frameworks outside commercial supplements?" Carver frowned. "No, we used standardized proprietary matrices." "So you did not compare the results with diets developed through patient-specific counseling?" "That is not standard research," Carver said, her tone slicing. May nodded slowly. "Thank you. No further questions." Carver's eyes narrowed, as if annoyed that a grandmother could question her. May returned to her seat, breathing hard, while Shaw looked bored. "Your Honor," he announced, "I move that Mrs. Musk's defense be limited, as she has yet to produce any compelling documentation." Judge Lowell regarded May with an exhausted expression. "Mrs. Musk, if you cannot provide credible evidence by tomorrow, I will have no choice but to consider a summary judgment in Atlas Labs' favor." The courtroom fell quiet. The air felt brittle, as if one more breath might shatter it. May rose, gripping the back of her chair for balance. "Your Honor, please," she said, "I am not a lawyer. I will not pretend otherwise. But I have practiced nutritional science and patient care for 40 years. I have documentation, I have testimony, I have lived this formula with thousands of patients." Judge Lowell started to interrupt, but May held up one trembling hand. "Please, Your Honor, let me present my evidence tomorrow. Let me defend the work I have devoted my entire life to." There was a pause. Judge Lowell studied her, eyes sharp, measuring. Finally she sighed. "You have until tomorrow morning, Mrs. Musk. Do not waste this court's time." "Thank you, Your Honor." Shaw leaned across his table, voice dripping contempt. "You might as well get it over with, Mrs. Musk. Withdraw now and save yourself the embarrassment." May faced him, a steel thread running through her words even as her hands shook. "I will not withdraw." He smirked. We shall see. As the court adjourned for the day, Maye gathered her scattered papers. She could hear the chatter of reporters, smell the faint coffee on their breath as they crowded the hall outside. One voice cut through them all, a woman's voice from behind a phone camera. Granny Musk is really going to humiliate herself tomorrow, folks. You heard it here first. Maye paused by the courtroom doors. Her knees felt weak, but she refused to collapse. Every step back to that rented office felt heavier, as if she were dragging years of doubt behind her. Inside the office, she shut the door and leaned against it, fighting the sting of tears. No cameras here, no eyes judging her. Just silence. She dropped the tote on the floor and sat in the creaky chair, letting her breath settle. She opened her folders one more time, reading over notes written decades ago, remembering each name and face. She pictured the mothers who had hugged her in gratitude, the men who had survived heart attacks thanks to her careful plans, the children who had grown healthy on simple meals she had taught them to prepare. Her eyes lifted to the ceiling, drawing in a deep, steadying breath. They do not know me, she whispered. They do not know what I have survived. She picked up a pen, determined hands starting to reorganize her pages. Clinic charts, lab letters, patient testimonies. All of it, from a life of fighting for better food, better lives. Outside the window, the courthouse across the street glowed in the fading sunlight, cold and majestic and merciless. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow, I will show them. And in that moment, though no one saw it, her eyes grew bright with a calm, unwavering light, as if somewhere deep in her spirit, an unbreakable foundation had taken hold. Morning light sharpened the corners of Courtroom 7, bouncing off marble columns as if the building itself expected another easy rout. Reporters filed in with their coffee cups and jaded smirks, certain they were about to witness Maye Musk's final collapse. Dominic Shaw arrived with his team, crisp and composed, tapping on his phone and barely glancing toward the defense table. Even Judge Lowell seemed resigned as she took her seat, black robes rippling with quiet authority. Court is now in session, she declared. Mrs. Musk, I trust you are prepared. Maye stood, shoulders straighter than they had been in days, her voice measured though the courtroom microphone picked up a faint tremor. Your Honor, I am ready to present my evidence. Shaw folded his hands, a mocking grin twitching at the corner of his mouth. Proceed, the judge said, tone wary but fair. Maye took a breath so deep it seemed to root her to the floor. Your Honor, before I begin, I would like to call my first witness. Dr. Harold Vance. A tall, grey-haired man in a conservative suit stood from the gallery. He moved with a quiet confidence that turned heads instantly. Shaw's eyes narrowed, searching his memory. Please state your credentials, Maye asked. Dr. Vance nodded. I am a medical doctor specializing in geriatric nutrition, with a fellowship in clinical biochemistry. For the past 10 years I have consulted on evidence-based dietary therapies. And your relationship to me? 5 years ago, Dr. Vance continued, I worked with Mrs. Musk and a Montreal-based biotech lab to validate a set of nutritional protocols she had developed through decades of practice. We standardized those elements, ran controlled trials, and submitted results to the Canadian Nutritional Sciences Association, who certified the findings as legitimate therapeutic support for healthy aging. He held up a thick binder, stamped with the association's seal. Shaw shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. We were not given advance notice of this witness or these documents. Judge Lowell held up a hand. Overruled. This is a bench trial, Mr. Shaw, not a jury. I will allow the testimony. Shaw glared, swallowing his protest. Dr. Vance calmly opened the binder. Your Honor, here is the original certification, dated 5 years ago, with unique lab signatures and independent sample testing results. Maye stepped forward, voice steadier now. Additionally, Your Honor, I have patient records from my clinic practice going back 30 years. These records document patterns of blood glucose control, weight management, cardiovascular improvement, all achieved using the same principles in my formula. She handed a second folder to the court clerk, who delivered it to Judge Lowell. Your Honor, these are raw clinic charts, signed by the patients, scanned and archived in my practice long before Atlas Labs was even incorporated. The judge flipped through several pages, eyes thoughtful. Maye did not stop. I also wish to submit emails exchanged between myself and the Canadian Dietetics Council dating back 8 years. These emails discuss ingredient ratios, patient outcomes, and requests for further research collaboration. She handed the printed emails across, each with date stamps and official council addresses. Judge Lowell raised an eyebrow, intrigued now. Finally, Maye said, her voice finding power, I have a laboratory video from Montreal showing the testing process on the active ingredients in my formula. She nodded toward a technician near the evidence cart. Please play the video. The screen lit up with a lab room, white walls, the whir of machines. A gloved scientist explained each measured step, clearly referencing Mrs. Musk's working formula by name and showing time-stamped data collection. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the reporters, always eager to pounce, seemed stunned. Shaw's face had turned a dangerous shade of pink. Your Honor, I strongly object to the introduction of so-called raw footage that we cannot verify chain of custody. Maye met his gaze without flinching. These files are authenticated by the Canadian Nutritional Sciences Association. I have the affidavits here. She passed them to the clerk with a steady hand. Judge Lowell leaned back, studying Maye as if seeing her for the first time. Mrs. Musk, these documents appear to be well supported. Do you wish to call any other witnesses? Maye nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I would like to recall Dr. Vance briefly. Vance returned to the stand, composed as ever. Dr. Vance, did you or any member of your lab ever receive samples or protocols from Atlas Labs? Absolutely not, he answered firmly. All of our research was based on Mrs. Musk's clinic data, reviewed under medical ethics guidelines. And in your opinion, Maye pressed, could these results have been independently arrived at by Atlas Labs in just 2 years? Highly unlikely, Dr. Vance stated. The patient data patterns alone would have required decades to establish. A few reporters actually gasped. Maye felt her shoulders lift, breath returning, voice strong. Thank you, Dr. Vance. Judge Lowell took off her glasses, polishing them in silence. Then she stared at Shaw. Counsel, do you wish to cross-examine? Shaw stepped forward, but his earlier confidence seemed to have cracked. Dr. Vance, he began, you admit Mrs. Musk is not a physician. She is a registered dietitian with extensive postgraduate training, Vance answered smoothly, and in our field that is a recognized specialty. Shaw tried to recover. But your lab also tested ingredients similar to commercial supplements, did you not? Yes, Vance said. And the formulas Mrs. Musk developed were significantly different in their ratios and their multi-stage absorption profiles. Shaw blinked, unsure what to attack next. No further questions, he finally muttered, retreating. Maye stepped forward again. Your Honor, these documents and testimony show a clear, decades-long development process that is entirely separate from Atlas Labs' claims. Judge Lowell paused, letting the echo of Maye's words settle. The judge glanced from the binder to the clinic records to the video still playing on the screen, then back at Maye. The courtroom was so still, it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Mrs. Musk, Judge Lowell finally said, your evidence is extensive and appears credible on first review. A murmur spread across the gallery. People who had come to watch a public collapse were now shifting in their seats, a ripple of respect forming. Maye nodded, hands clasped to steady herself. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Lowell leaned forward. Tomorrow we will hear final arguments. In the meantime, the court will recess while I study these materials further. Mrs. Musk, you may leave your evidence with the clerk for official archiving. Yes, Your Honor. As the judge stood, the courtroom seemed to exhale all at once. Maye gathered her folders, feeling a strange lightness. The weight of the shame that had clung to her seemed to lift as people watched with new eyes. In the hallway, a few reporters approached, no longer smirking but cautiously respectful. Mrs. Musk, one asked, where did you learn to build a case like that? Maye smiled, faint but warm. I learned to stand up for myself a long time ago. Another voice piped up from the back. What will you do if you win? Maye looked over her shoulder at the courthouse doors, thinking of her patients, her family, all those sleepless nights. I will keep helping people, she said simply. When she stepped outside into the sunlight, the same cool wind swept across the marble steps, but it felt different now. Brighter somehow. Kinder. For the first time since this ordeal had begun, Maye stood taller, feeling every year of her life as proof that she had earned this moment. Somewhere in the distance, a news van replayed her courtroom presentation, commentators scrambling to shift their narratives. Granny Musk might have a real shot, they admitted, almost grudgingly. And Maye kept walking, steady, head held high, heart beating with a quiet power that no one could take from her. The following morning, the courthouse was buzzing with a restless energy that clung to the marble walls like static. Reporters jostled for position near the doors, waiting for Maye to appear, no longer to mock her but to see what she might do next. When she stepped inside, calm, composed, dressed in the same simple blue dress, a hush fell over the gallery. Her hands still trembled a bit as she organized her folders, but her eyes were steady, locked onto Judge Lowell with a quiet confidence that had grown stronger overnight. "Court is now in session," Judge Lowell announced. "Mrs. Musk, you may proceed with any final points before we move to closing statements." Maye nodded, rising carefully, one hand resting on her papers as if grounding herself in every memory that had brought her here. "Your Honor," she began, "yesterday I presented patient charts, lab documentation, video testing, and live testimony. All of this confirms that my formula was developed through decades of evidence-based practice." Judge Lowell inclined her head. "Yes, Mrs. Musk, I have reviewed those documents overnight." Maye drew a slow breath, then spoke with a clarity that seemed to stop even the low hum of courtroom whispers. "Your Honor, I would also like to draw the court's attention to the Dietary Therapeutics Act of 2015, Section 19C. Judge Lowell blinked, pen pausing over her notepad. "I am not immediately familiar with that section. Please explain." Maye lifted a small printed booklet from her files. Section 19C specifically protects nutritional formulations created by licensed dietitians and clinical counselors if they can provide longitudinal evidence of patient benefit predating any commercial patent claims. The goal of that clause was to keep powerful corporations from exploiting therapeutic knowledge developed over years of clinical care. A ripple ran through the room. Shaw glanced sideways at his team, confusion breaking through his polished exterior. Maye continued, her voice gathering power. "This provision recognizes that patient-centered innovation deserves protection equal to lab-developed products, provided the documentation is thorough. I believe the evidence I filed yesterday meets every condition listed under 19C. Judge Lowell's brow furrowed as she leaned forward. "One moment, Mrs. Musk." She motioned to the clerk, who brought over a thick law reference volume. The judge flipped through the pages quickly, lips moving as she scanned the lines, then looked back at Maye with a dawning sense of respect. "Mrs. Musk," she said carefully, "I see that Section 19C does indeed exist and would be relevant here if your documentation holds up to further review." "Thank you, Your Honor," Maye replied, a hint of relief slipping through. Shaw stood abruptly, his voice higher than usual. "Your Honor, that clause is practically unknown. It has never been tested in a federal court, to my knowledge." Lowell shot him a look of unamused patience. "It is still the law, counsel. Perhaps you should have done your homework." The gallery laughed, a quiet, shocked ripple of amusement. Maye kept her posture calm, though inside her heart was pounding like a drum. For months she had wondered if her meticulous notes and tiny handwritten ledgers would matter against glossy corporate presentations. Now, at last, it felt as though all that quiet labor, all those years of patient conversations, had been seen for what it truly was. Judge Lowell closed the reference book and set it down with a heavy finality. "Mrs. Musk, you have presented to this court a body of work which, I must admit, is among the most thorough I have seen from any self-represented party. You are not only a public figure or a model as the press has painted you. You are, plainly, a dedicated clinical nutritionist who built something with great care and heart." Maye felt tears press at the corners of her eyes but kept her chin high. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge glanced around the room. "Counsel for Atlas Labs, I advise you to consider carefully whether you wish to continue this fight in light of Section 19C. Shaw opened his mouth but no words came. His face had gone pale, and one of his junior attorneys leaned over to whisper furiously in his ear. Maye stood perfectly still, allowing herself to breathe, allowing herself for the first time to believe that all those lost nights, all the scorn, all the whispered insults had been worth enduring. Judge Lowell leaned slightly closer, voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. Mrs. Musk, you have reminded me that real expertise is not always printed on a law degree. Sometimes it is printed on the life a person has lived. The courtroom fell silent, touched by something unexpectedly human in the judge's words. Maye folded her hands gently on the table. I am prepared to move forward with my closing statement tomorrow, Your Honor, she said. Lowell nodded, eyes softer now. I look forward to it, Mrs. Musk. Truly. The judge banged the gavel to close for the day, and people began to stir, their conversations different from before, filled with admiration instead of scorn. Reporters gathered at the doors, no longer searching for a humiliating soundbite but trying to understand how they had so badly misread her. As Maye gathered her papers, she could see the reflection of herself in the polished wood of the defense table. A woman lined by experience but still unbroken, still powerful, still here. Outside, the wind had shifted, warmer, brushing her face as if the world itself had decided to give her back a little faith. She stood on the courthouse steps and looked around at the cameras, no longer afraid of their lenses. One of the journalists called out, Mrs. Musk, how did you know about that legal clause? Maye smiled faintly. You read everything, she said, if you have something worth protecting. And then she turned, walking calmly into the midday light, heart steady, mind sharper than ever, ready to finish the fight she had started so long ago. 3 weeks later, the sunlight poured through tall glass windows in a hotel conference hall filled with the low hum of conversation and the rustle of name tags. Rows of women, many with silver strands woven into their hair and lines of experience etched around their eyes, filled the seats with an air of cautious hope. On the stage stood Maye Musk, wearing a simple white blazer and the calm grace of someone who had weathered the worst storms. She was no longer defending herself. Today, she was here to lift others up. Welcome, she began, her voice warm and sure, to all of you who wonder if it is too late to build something new. Let me assure you, it is never too late. A round of gentle applause rippled through the hall. Among the guests, a familiar figure sat in the front row, black robes replaced by a dignified navy dress. Judge Catherine Lowell watched intently, hands folded, her eyes showing not the cold measure of a gavel but a quiet respect. After the speech ended, Lowell stepped forward, extending a hand. Mrs. Musk, she said with a hint of a smile, I never imagined the woman standing in my courtroom would one day invite me to such an inspiring event. Maye laughed softly, taking the judge's hand. None of us could have predicted this, Your Honor. Call me Catherine today, please, Lowell replied. Maye nodded, eyes sparkling. I have been thinking, Catherine continued, lowering her voice so only Maye could hear. I would like to help you promote this nutritional program. I may not know much about business, but I know how important health education is, and I believe you are doing something extraordinary. Maye felt her heart swell, remembering every humiliating headline and every night of doubt. Now, standing next to the very judge who once doubted her, she felt something close to triumph, but softer, deeper, more peaceful. You would do that? She asked. Lowell gave a gracious smile. I would be honored to serve as an ambassador. Maye shook her hand with genuine gratitude. Together, we can remind the world that women's knowledge and resilience are never to be underestimated. Applause rose from the audience as if they had heard every word, and Maye turned to see Tosca at the side of the stage, holding up her phone, recording the moment. Her daughter's eyes were shining with pride, and for a second Maye could see all 3 of her children standing there in her memory, those days when they had nothing but each other. Maye smiled, radiant, letting Tosca capture a candid moment as she clasped the judge's hand. The video would later go viral across social media, drawing thousands of messages from women who felt seen, inspired, strengthened. As the applause faded, Maye took the microphone again, breathing in the quiet power of the room. Thank you for believing in yourselves, she told the crowd. Remember, the world will try to define you, but only you decide what you are truly capable of. The women in the audience stood, one after another, their faces lit with courage and gratitude. And as Maye stepped down from the stage, laughter and hope filling the space behind her, she knew this victory was no longer just hers. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told she was too old, too small, too weak to fight for her dreams. And in that moment, Maye felt certain that no one would ever laugh her out of a courtroom again.